Greetings, Thobeka Dlamini here. I'm so excited about today. Thank you so much to all of those that have been subscribing. Please do share this broadcast and please do subscribe if it's the first time that you're on this platform. This is Life Giving Conversations with Thobeka Dlamini. I'm particularly excited about today's topic. We're not going to be too long, but there are certain things that I just want us to just talk about, things that are crucial, things that are overlooked, things that are spoken behind walls and people don't really want to be open about them. And for most pastors' wives, I know that it's things that they wish they were told before they got married, more especially for a field that they've never been in. Everything is new. Everything is just overwhelming. And you find that most pastors' wives, when they go into the marital union, they're prepared, they've been, mentored and taught on what to do as wives, but there's really talks on what is expected of them as pastors' wives. So the reason why I did this video is to assist a lot of other pastors' wives out there and also those that are pastors' wives to be on what to expect. Because sometimes when we make decisions, we need to have a little bit of insight as to what our decisions entail. So please do hit the subscribe button. There will be more very interesting videos coming on as the channel is going to grow very soon. We're going to invite guests. We're going to get people in to come and engage on topics that we really, really talk about. So today we're going to be talking on no pastor's wife should be a hindrance to her husband's call. No pastor's wife should be a hindrance to her husband's call. I know that this is a very sensitive topic, and more especially when pastors' wives are involved, when we meet up in groups outside of church, or when we meet up to engage and encourage one another, we usually take the premise of a pastor's wife dealing with the complications, and we hardly speak about the pastor's wife maybe being part of the complication. And this is what makes this video different, so that all of us can sort of look at ourselves, look at our contribution towards what our husbands have been called to do, and check on a scale whether we really are benefiting them in what they intend to achieve or what God has laid in their hearts to achieve, or we actually being a hindrance to what God wants them to achieve. So some of these points are going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but I do believe that if we know the truth and we take it in and we make decisions, we do find liberation in doing the things that God expects us to do. But if we take the truth and resent it, it does not help us. It remains a point of resentment. So that's why I want us to just highlight on a few points. I'm not going to touch on everything that could happen. I know you and I, if you're a pastor's wife and you're watching, you and I know that there's a whole lot more to the picture, but I'm excited to just share a few nuggets on what you can do as a pastor's wife that can actually be a hindrance to your husband's call. And we're going to dive into scripture immediately. I'm basing my first point on Jeremiah chapter number 1. And my first point is that there are things that God decides before you come or before you arrive, and that is one thing that you need to make peace with. So from Jeremiah chapter number 1, we find God calling Jeremiah, and we find him alerting him of what he destined him to be, and God is highlighting that he knew him before he was even formed in his mother's womb. Then he said, after knowing him, he set him apart and he appointed him. Now, those 3 points are highlighting to us that there are things that God decided before we even came into the picture. So any pastor's wife who's listening to me today, you do not need to be ignorant to the fact that there were some things that God decided on your behalf or on your husband's behalf way before you came. And this becomes an issue for pastors' wives because some callings are different from maybe what other people are called to, and they find themselves frustrated at the trail or the route that God is leading their husbands into, and this thing can be a cause of strife and conflict within the pastoral couple's home as to, no, but I didn't sign up for that. This is not what God spoke about initially. I just want to say that to everybody who's married to a pastor, to everybody who's married to a man of God or somebody who is set apart for a certain mandate, there are certain things that God will decide on your behalf and you have to follow, unfortunately. And these are the truths that we hardly talk about, that if you are going to sign up to marry a pastor, I know there are those that really found out already they were married to a pastor, and they did not know that that person was a pastor. And along the way, things unfold. God reveals his plan, and it's always a big shock. But what I'm trying to say is that there are those that do sign up for it. There are those that do say, no, I understand that you're called, and I'm going to go with you on this journey, and I'm going to be a source of help, in whatever you have been called to do. And you find that there are now clashes, because sometimes God will lead people in unfamiliar paths. Sometimes God will lead people to paths that are less traveled, or sometimes God will lead to people to new paths even. And I know that, with the evolving of things, and with the gospel, in the 21st century taking a different turn, people have a tendency to downplay really some of the mandates that God has given to people. So if you're a pastor's wife, just make sure that you have an understanding that there are things that God would decide for you or for your husband on your behalf, and you need to be a support structure, sometimes even when you have no full understanding of the big picture. And now I want to address pastors whilst I'm on that point. So to say, it's very important to have as a sort of a certain structure around your life, or to have order around your life, because being called by God does not really give leverage for us as individuals, or us, the called out ones, to be negligent in planning for our lives, in projecting for our lives. Though we know there are certain paths that God will take us through that might be unfamiliar to others. And that is when you will need a spouse that will be able to understand that God has called you in a certain direction. And so number 2, I want us to look at this point also. It's almost married to the first point that I've highlighted. Point number 2, it says you need to cultivate a life of prayer and reading of the word, because you cannot be carnal as a pastor's wife. Now, if I were to rephrase that point, I would say to you, do not be carnal as a pastor's wife. You cannot be a pastor's wife and be carnal, because you are in a highly spiritual environment. You are in an environment that needs your spiritual senses, or your spiritual antennas, to be on point, your spiritual antennas to be sensitive. And so it's very important as a pastor's wife that you cultivate a life of reading the word and a life of prayer, to ensure that your spiritual senses are sharp, to ensure that your spiritual senses, you are able to dictate, and you are able to discern some of the things that God is doing in your spouse's life. So 1 Corinthians 2 verse 14, this is what Paul says: but the natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit, for they are foolishness to him. He cannot accept them because they are spiritually discerned. They are spiritually discerned. In other words, the natural man, I as Thobeka, there are things that I might not be able to dictate in the natural, but once I tap into the spirit, once I tap into the things that God has laid for my spouse in the spirit, it's easier to gain understanding and to discern certain things. And I think this is one area where, as pastors' wives, no matter what happens, no matter what storm we may go through, no matter how discouraged we may be, no matter how, how tough the seasons might be that we might encounter, one thing that we need to ensure is that we develop this type of a relationship with God, where God can download things to us, where God can speak about certain things to us and let us in on certain things. And I believe that most pastors' wives that might have a challenge in cultivating this area in their lives really have a problem, or have a serious problem in following or in submitting to what God wants to do at that time. And I'm reminded of the story of Sarai when the angel came and was bringing good news to say, what, there's a son that's going to be born, and it's going to come from your wife. It's not going to come from anywhere else. And I remember when the Bible clearly states that Sarai laughed, because whatever God was saying just seemed a bit, out of place, just seemed a bit impossible, just seemed, abstract. And it helps as a wife to cultivate a life of prayer and the word, because it sensitizes you. And even when God is shifting you into a particular season with your spouse, God has that room or has that platform to speak to you and alert you of certain things. And I think this also helps you to be on par and to be able to pray for your husband and intercede for him, even in places where really things look impossible, even in places where things look dry. You are able to say, no, this is the direction that God is leading my spouse, and this is the support I'll give, and this is the direction I will take in praying for him. Point number 3. Do not be a headache, be a place of rest. Do not be a headache, be a place of rest. And I know that at this point, I'm only addressing it from the pastor's wife's perspective, but there are two sides to everything. There are some pastors' wives, some pastors that might be saying, no, I wish my wife could see this video because she's a headache, because she's a lot of trouble, because she talks too much. I know there are already some people you are thinking of that, no, I need to send this video because this person is a headache. But I believe in the upcoming videos, we're also going to tackle a little bit on why are pastors frustrated in their marriages? Why are some pastors frustrated in their marriages? And we're going to be touching on both sides. But allow me today to just zoom in on the pastor's wife not being a headache, but a place of rest. Putting aside maybe some of the things for now that might cause you to have a headache yourself, but just focusing on the principle of it here. So in Judges chapter 15, verse 17 to 18, the Bible here is speaking of a time when Samson had just, had just killed 1,000 men, 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone. And the Bible says, when he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramath Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? This is just a small portion to give you exactly the space, the idea of the space that Samson was in. Yes, Samson was not married, but this is the space that he was in. He was exhausted. He was thirsty. He was feeling drained. He was, saying, at this point, God, I'm thirsty. Listen, I need something to drink lest I fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. In other words, he could feel that after all the work that I've done, something has left me. I am not the same as when I was pursuing the mission, or when I was ministering, or when I was delivering people, or whatever the case may be, whatever area that your husband has been called to. And it reminds me of the story of Jesus when Jesus looked around and said, who touched me? And people were confused because there was a crowd around him. People were around him. Everybody was touching him to a certain extent that was in his vicinity. But Jesus said he could feel power leaving him. He could feel as the woman touched him that something was leaving him. And this is something that we need to understand. If, we're not saying that people that are married to men that are not pastors, there is nothing significant that those men are doing out there. But there is something about ministry work that just takes away your strength and drains you after you have ministered, and after you have fought many battles, and after you've been in the forefront of the battle and of the warfare. You You want to come back to a place of rest. You want to come back to a place that is going to quench your thirst, whether it's an emotional thirst or whatever the thirst that you have. You want to a place where you can lay your head. Now, without going too much into Samson's story and what happened in his life, I want to highlight the principle of these men are people that God has set apart. They are people that God has assigned. They carry a lot of burdens. They deal with a lot at the same time. They experience a lot of emotions at the same time. And it's very important as a pastor's wife that we do not be headaches. When people that have worked so hard come back home, they need to come back to a place of rest. Yes, our homes, in our homes, we have challenges. In our homes, we have maybe issues that we are still working through as couples, maybe as a family structure. Maybe we have challenges of our own, but when a man that has gone out to war comes back to his home, he needs to come back to a place of rest. And so it's very important as a pastor's wife that though there are things that maybe need ironing out in the home, that you allow your husband to settle in and rest first. There are unfortunately a lot of pastors that are coming back to restless homes. There are a lot of pastors that are coming back to spouses that are not very happy with them. The whole world is clapping for them except their spouses. And I think we're going to be addressing that in the upcoming videos. We're going to be talking about seeds that you plant in your marriage and then those seeds becoming a harvest in your own marriage. But on this part, we're just speaking to pastors' wives that even if you just got married to a pastor and you are new in the field, these are some of the things that you need to look into, that you need to be, to cultivate an environment where your spouse can come back and rest. Okay. Yes, we understand that God is his peace, and we understand that it's God who gives him peace that surpasses all understanding. But also there is an environment at home that can allow him to rest, that can allow him to quench the thirst, that can allow him to refresh for the next assignment or for the next, ministerial duty that is upon him. Then point number 4, I want us to look at Proverbs 21 verse 23 that says, watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble. This scripture is a bit, it's a bit rough, but this translation is saying, watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble. I think this is very important as pastors' wives. This is one very important point to look into, especially as a new pastor's wife, even as a matured pastor's wife. I think the worst thing that can happen for any pastor is to have a wife who cannot keep their mouth shut, who cannot sit on top of people's issues, who cannot sit on top of people's problems. And this happens a lot. I always say, even to young pastors' wives, that sometimes in our marriages we can become a little bit complacent, and you think that your husband is not aware of your behavior as you are taking your cell phone, calling friends, updating them on the latest gossip, updating them on the latest church politics. Husbands are looking at this behavior, though they may not call it out immediately, but they are looking at a pattern that, sure, this work is not protected because of 1, 2, 3. If my wife speaks up like this about the work, this is what it says about my ministry. This is what it says about the work that God has called me to. So it's very important, pastors' wives, that we really do watch what comes out of our mouths. We do watch our tongue. We do watch what we speak and what we do not speak. And we need to know our cue. We need to know when to be silent. We need to know when to speak. Because the Bible advises us in the book of James that the tongue is such a small organ. It's such an insignificant small organ that can set the whole, the whole, what do I call it, even the whole region on fire, even not just the whole church, but the whole region on fire. A person that cannot tame their tongue, a person that does not know when to speak and when to keep quiet, can be problematic in their husband's calling. And this has happened a lot. Sometimes we don't discuss these things publicly. We want to discuss them in our corners as pastors' wives when we encourage one another. But there are some ministries that have fallen apart literally because of the tongue of a pastor's wife, because of the tongue of a pastor's wife. And I remember very clearly God teaching me a lesson on this particular matter, on really an issue that I wanted to call out because it was, it was going on for years and I was losing a lot of patience around this issue. And I remember I wanted to really confront and really set things straight and really put things in order. When God vividly spoke to me, he spoke about the fact that when he starts a work in a person, it is him who works in a person. There is no amount of trying to rectify things or putting things in order that will fix things. And God vividly spoke to me and said, never interrupt my process in people's lives. And that thing stuck with me, that when people come into a congregation, they are works in progress. Yes, they might step on your toes. Yes, they might be unfair. There might be injustices here and there, but never find yourself as a pastor's wife attacking people personally one-on-one because of 1, 2, 3 and so forth. So when it comes to your tongue, please use discretion, please use discernment, and above all, use self-control. Very, very important. And I want to touch on the fifth point as I'm about to close, is that you need, as a pastor's wife, not to compare your union to everybody else's union. And this is a big one. There are people that are married to pastors, and I'm going to be just very blunt about it, that even pastors' mandates are not the same. There are some mandates that demand more than other mandates, and there are some mandates that need you to go an extra mile, maybe more than other mandates. Then there are wives that have their husbands at home most of the time. They are just pastoring during the week and having church on Sundays. Then their wives that have to release their husbands to go maybe for 2 weeks, maybe for a week to, for soul winning campaigns, or they've got a traveling ministry. They are conference speakers. They are traveling all over. They are speaking all over. And so the dynamics are not the same. That's why you can never put sort of one umbrella under everybody. That's why it's needed that you cultivate a life of prayer and the word, because you need God's discretion about what you should do and what your journey requires. But this is one really destructive thing that I've seen, and pastors are struggling with this a lot when their wives are complaining or are not content within their marriages because they feel that their marriages are not the same as all their other friends. There are so many dynamics that apply to ministry. For instance, I'm just going to give one example. You find that most couples go out on weekends, on Fridays or Saturdays, and you find that for most pastors, that is when their business picks up on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Either they are burying somebody, or somebody's graduation, somebody's has a function somewhere, they need to be speaking somewhere, or they need to be doing this and that. And I'm not in any way condoning that pastors have unstructured lives where they are moving from this to that. But the reality of the matter is that some days that are special to you might be interrupted by unforeseen circumstances. Giving an example, last year, just towards our anniversary on the 1st of May, a church member died. Church member very close to me, been in the church for about 8 years, passed on. And on the morning of the 1st of our anniversary, we had to bury somebody who dear to us. And on the same day, we had to sort of celebrate our anniversary. I'm trying to give you a picture to say, sometimes you, as pastoral couples, you can plan, and some of those plans can be interrupted. Of course, I always advise pastors when I get to engage with them on the fact that if it's something that you can get away from, please do get away from it on your special days. Try not to schedule things that are, that might tamper with your special days. But if it does happen that it's something that you can't get out of, then it's nothing that your wife should throw tantrums about. And really, pastors' wives, we need to get it into our system that when we are married to pastors, not everything is going to be the same as everybody else's. And we need to really rid ourselves of that we need to rid ourselves of the mentality that your marriage should look like anybody else's marriage. Now, I'm not saying your marriage should not be fun, should not be happy, but I'm trying to say sometimes whilst your friends go out on a Saturday, you might be somewhere praying somebody, or you might be, comforting a church member, or you might be attending to some serious matter or counseling a marriage. So you find that some pastors' wives have discontent within their marriages only because the picture they had of marriage is slightly now disrupted, and now they are trying to say, but those other ones are in ministry, but they seem to be going out and having fun more than anything else. Maybe whilst I'm at that, it's very important, if there's any pastor who's watching this, I know this is for pastors' wife, to say, do not leave your love life or your love celebrations to special days only, because your lives are sort of full of, sometimes events that are unplanned or things that are unplanned. Be intentional about loving your spouse every day. Be intentional about celebrating your love life every day, so that should things be interrupted by, by things that just come through and take place, that at least the love tank of your spouse is full. At least your marriage is being watered. It's not something that is starving to be watered. It's not something that is dry and needs to be resurrected from the dead. So be very conscious, even as pastors, as how we handle these things is very, very important, because I'm a firm believer that it's very important to cultivate the life at home, because the life at home is what, nurtures what you are supposed to do when you're out there. And so if there is no peace in the home, it eventually affects even what you are supposed to do. And, I know a lot of pastors have taken the route of saying, okay, if you're going to be a distraction for me, I'm going to go and do ministry, and you'll see what you do. You'll figure yourself out, And I do believe that most ministries, have really progressed at the expense of the marriages, and I know a lot of pastors will say, you must show us the figures, how do you prove that? How do you know that? When you begin to engage openly with a lot of leaders and a lot of people in ministry, you realize that there are a lot of pastors that are doing big things, but they are frustrated in their households. And these are the things we should start talking about, that listen, let us cultivate the life at home, so that whatever we do it freely. We don't do it with a heavy heart, so that the mandate that we've been called to do can run, and can expand. And really, as pastors, I always say that cultivate a healthy marriage. Work on your marriage, so that, when the ministry begins to expand, when the ministry begins to reach more people, you and your spouse have an understanding. You don't both need to be in the forefront. Some pastors' wives have careers, some have got businesses. A lot of pastors' wives are doing a lot of things outside of ministry, but being in unison is what counts, because two cannot walk together unless they agree. Even if your spouse is not fully there, but let both of you be in sync as you progress, as you move towards the things that God has called your spouse to do. Allow that marriage to be cultivated and to grow, because at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that at the peak of ministry, things explode. Things fall apart, and people are like, oh, everything looks so perfect. The church was growing. They looked so happy. They had matching outfits. They were always everywhere together. And you find that within the home, there was a lot of weeds. There was a lot of things that were not taken care of. So I urge all pastors, I really want to urge even all pastors' wives to say, if there's one area you should really cultivate, it is your marriage, because it's gonna one way or another affect what your husband is doing in the long run, especially in the area of ministry. It's a very sacred space. It's a very divine space. I always say that, when it comes to ministry, yes, we might face a lot of things. We might get hurt. We might stumble. We might, hit a few walls, but we must understand that God has called us to a sacred space, and we need to be accountable for each and every area of our lives. So with this short video, I just wanted to uplift a few, or maybe 100, maybe 1,000 pastors' wives, who knows, to say that you are doing a great job. Whatever needs you to, whatever is needed for you to adjust, please don't be proud. Don't be arrogant about it. In this walk, we need to be teachable. In this walk, we need to be custodians of what God has trusted us with. Moreover, we need to be good helpers, of the mandate that God has sent out our husbands to do. And we don't need to be destroyers, but we need to be builders. And I know that you are saying, yeah, but I'm also undergoing so many things. Why are my issues not addressed? And we'll be addressing that in the upcoming videos. So please, for today, I'm done. Please do subscribe. Please do share this broadcast. I know it's going to help 1, 2, 3, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, but we're hoping for the best. And we know that homes are going to be built. And please remember, if you are not a pastor and you are watching this broadcast, please do pray for your leaders. Please do support them. Please don't be a burden. Please make their load lighter. And I believe that when everything is done, it's to the glory of God. Until next time, God bless you.